The craftsmen and engineers who worked for the pharaohs could expect quite a few perks and benefits. In fact, one works manager here in Deir el-Medina actually recorded the reasons why some of his workmen had taken time off. One had been ill, fair enough. Another had been sacrificing to the god. Not sure whether he'd get away with that nowadays. Another one had been having a row with his wife. Another was building his house, and another one had been bitten by a scorpion. Oh, and one fellow had taken time off to brew some beer, and what's more, to drink it. So it wasn't all bad working for the pharaohs. At a street market in Cairo, Joanne tells me more about her favourite subject of mine. Beer.
Beer was drunk by everyone, men, women, children. It was a bit thick, a bit soupy, so they had to use
What is it a bit thick? I mean, how do you mean? I mean, sort of like...
Well, they made it with barley and bread and all kinds of things, and it kind of had a bit of a sediment. A bit, you know, it's a bit...
I mean, but more than like real beer has now in England. I mean, our real beer has sediment. A good beer should have a sediment.
Yeah, but this was just like vegetable soup. I mean, there were things floating in it, for goodness sake. So they had to sieve it or use a kind of special sieve straw. And the wealthy drank wine, of course. I mean, for instance, Tutankhamun, we know from his tomb goods, he preferred white wine.
Really?
Fairly dry white wine.
So Tutankhamun liked white wine.
Absolutely.
The ancient Egyptians loved their wine and beer. But there was another liquid that was even more important. Egypt is unlike any other country. Its people and its history are unique. And that uniqueness is based on this river. Egypt was, and Egypt is, the River Nile. But oddly enough, the thing that the ancient Egyptians particularly liked about the Nile was that it was prone to flooding. The first proper guidebook description of Egypt was written by the Greek Herodotus.
When the Nile inundates the land, all of Egypt becomes a sea, and only the towns remain above water, like islands. At such times, shipping no longer follows the stream, but goes straight across the country. For example, sailing right alongside the pyramids.
The reason why the flooding of the Nile was so important is that it brought silt down from Ethiopia and Uganda. This rich mud made all the difference between the fertile land and the barren desert. In fact, the ancient Egyptians were so fond of this mud, they actually named their country after it. They called it Kemet, or Black Land. And the land that wasn't touched by the annual flood, they called the Red Land, or Deshret, from which we get our English word desert. This reliance on what most people would regard as a natural disaster gave the ancient Egyptians a special sense of values that in some ways is the inverse of our own. For example, property was valued according to how liable it was to flooding, whether it always flooded, sometimes flooded, or never flooded. And black became the symbol of life, and white the symbol of death, mourning. It's a fair bet that Sennacherib and his wife felt themselves a part of this natural cycle of fertility. Survival may have been hard work, but it wasn't exactly a struggle. The gods themselves had designed the world to be kind to them at the beginning of time. And when life is good, and when the gods have been so generous, why change things? Any closer to Sennacherib? What was it like to be in his shoes, or at least in his clothes? Well, it just so happens that Joe has got a pattern book that can help us, haven't you, Joe?
Yeah, and we need to take it to the cloth shop first.
Okay. Well, tell us what the pattern book is.
Well, it was put together by a textile expert who's been examining for many years the actual clothing of the ancient Egyptians, how they were made and constructed.
Hello.
Hello. Could we see some material? ممكن نشوف هناك?
So what are we looking for, Joe?
We're looking for something fine white linen, creamy white linen that would have made something like this.
Yeah.
A kind of large overshirt, almost.
Now, did they wear the lighter cloth? Would that be because they could have lots of different garments like this? Whereas the poorer you were, you'd have only one garment or something. You'd have a heavy one that would last.
Very much so. I mean, the loincloths of the workers were generally coarser linen and, you know, a couple of changes of loincloth, and that was really it for the vast majority.
Very good.
Breathe in.
Great.
We need to make this ancient Egyptian garment, which is very, very simple. It's just a single piece of cloth. It has to fit terry.
What would I be wearing? Anything underneath?
In the underneath.
Funny you should mention that, Terry. I've got an ancient Egyptian pattern for loincloths.
A loincloth?
Ancient underpants.
I don't have to be fitted for that, do I?
No.
See the ancient Egyptian loincloth design.
Oh yes, there it is.
Oh, well, that's
There were some fantastic examples found at the workman's village as well.
Those are just exactly like, you know, two
it's
robots.
sort of split crotches, I don't know.
No, it was sewn down the middle.
Oh, good. While my tailor gets busy with my new outfit, Joanne and I head back to the village of Gurna, just outside the Valley of the Kings, to investigate another vital element of daily life in ancient Egypt. Sennajan has had a hard morning. He's been painting inside the pharaoh's tomb in 100-degree heat, but now it's lunchtime. So, what would he eat?
Of course, this was the staple of an ancient Egyptian diet as well, the beer and the bread. This is a typical ancient Egyptian meal. Their entire culture was based on the two ingredients we see on the table now. I mean, it's absolutely laden with calories. It really will pile the pounds
It's like a paratha. It's quite greasy. And
it is. But the beauty of it is, I mean, it is so high calorie, it would give an amazing amount of energy, which is, it's good, isn't it?
no, I didn't taste that part. It's lighter. I mean, you don't need to eat anything else than this. It's just delicious.
Well, this is the kind of stuff that the pyramids were basically built on, and recent excavations at Giza at the pyramid builders' village have found the huge bakeries which supplied the needs of the pyramid
These were the
builders.
foundations for those
Absolutely.
huge
I mean, the loaves that were made in kind of almost terracotta plant pots were such high calorie, dense loaves that they would have given all the energy necessary to build a pyramid.
I mean, when people hear, modern people think about the ancient Egyptians living on bread and beer, they think, oh, poor things. But, of course, they're thinking about sliced bread in a supermarket.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a different thing. There's taste, there's so many different kinds.
Today, in parts of rural Egypt, each lady has her own little oven outside the house, and they all make their own particular shapes, and sometimes with these kind of lumps, 3 lumps on the side, and sometimes with like little marks of decoration. And there's great rivalry amongst them sometimes as to who makes the best bread.
But I'm sure I've seen these in hieroglyphs. I've seen this shape in it on a...
You've seen them on tomb and temple walls as offerings. I mean, these things have been going for thousands of years.
I guess the onion and everything would have been chopped up and made into salad with
and quite possibly made into a sandwich. A piece of bread, you scatter the onions on anything else, roll it up, quite possibly stick it in your back pocket and take it off to work for later in the day.
So after the salad course, what would we have then?
After the salad, well, if you were a quite wealthy Egyptian or you'd been lucky that day hunting in the hunting down by the river, wildfowl, ducks and geese. Absolutely fantastic.
No, they wouldn't have had duck.
They would have had duck, and they like to cook it. They like to have crispy roast duck basted in honey. And you even see the textures in tomb scenes. You can see that. You see the skin of the duck, the way it's kind of been plucked. That is something the ancient artists went to great lengths to show that the meat had been prepared. And apart from roast duck, the Egyptians often prepared their meat and salted it, and then hung it up to dry. The butcher's shop's empty, but can you see the hooks that are hanging from the ceiling?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of tomb scenes and temple scenes show butchery and sort of the places where animals were slaughtered and the way that meat was dried up, and quite often fish was dried up to hang there to dry, sort of ancient kippers, if you like. They were really big on things like that.
The dried fish was quite a...
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. To 4,000 years ago, ordinary Egyptians lived lives as full and rich as they do today. They also had experts and technicians just as skilled as today's. In fact, the ancient engineers could have taught today's a trick or two. In the mid-20th century, the Egyptian government decided to build a dam to control the flooding of the Nile. The dam promised to bring all sorts of advantages to the modern world. The snag was that it would create a huge lake exactly where one of the greatest monuments of the ancient world stood, the great temple built by the pharaoh Ramesses II in the 13th century BC at Abu Simbel. So, in the 1960s, the United Nations organized the rescue of the temple by chopping it up into bits and moving it to the top of the cliff. However, deep inside the temple sits a row of gods. At the original site, the temple had been carefully aligned so that twice each year, on February the 23rd and October the 23rd, the rays from the rising sun bathed the statues of three of the gods in light. The modern engineers tried to reproduce this effect, but they got it wrong. The ancient engineers knew what they were doing. Life in Egypt enjoys a quite extraordinary continuity with the past, but that doesn't mean there haven't been huge changes. There have. In the year 391 AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius issued a decree banning all pagan temples throughout the empire. Well, for the Egyptians, this was a disaster. For their temples weren't just places of worship. They were schools, they were universities, they were libraries, they were medical centres, they were law courts. They were the centre of civic life. Closing them down spelt the official end of the old ways and the end of the written language. And a few centuries later, the coming of another religion, Islam, spelt the end of the spoken language. However, the language of ancient Egypt was still being spoken, and it still is. For 1,600 years, despite frequent official repression, the Coptic Church and priests like Father Isaac Ramsey have kept alive the Coptic language.
Coptic is a derivative of the ancient Egyptian language.
So you're actually speaking the language that was spoken by the pharaohs?
Yes.
may be that the way Coptic is being spoken here bears as little resemblance to the way it was spoken in the ancient world as modern English does to Anglo-Saxon. But nevertheless, the Christian Coptic Church was keeping this dead language alive in the same way that the Roman Catholic Church was keeping Latin alive. And the world's earliest recorded script was still being spoken. And it was this realization that was crucial to cracking the meaning of the hieroglyphs. So here we are, listening to the language of the pharaohs and able to read their scripts. What words of wisdom, what secrets and mysteries are they handing down to us through the millennia? On this day, the following clothes were given to the laundrymen: 10 kilts, 8 loincloths, and 5 sanitary towels. Actually, the word hieroglyph is a bit of a misnomer. You see, when the ancient Greeks first came across these mystical writings on the Egyptians' tombs and temples, they naturally assumed they were full of mystical significance. So they called them hieroglyphs, or sacred carvings. But in fact, a lot of them were far from mystical, and they weren't all just carved on temple walls. The Egyptians invented the first paper. They used the inside of the reed known as the papyrus, and that's where we get the name paper from. And this was what they used for official documents and for archiving. But for everyday notes and messages, there was a much cheaper version at hand, or rather at foot. They had bits of broken pottery or shards of limestone. And this is what they scribbled their messages on. But for this, they developed a kind of shorthand version of the hieroglyph, which is known as hieratic. Is somebody writing something there?